Parshas ki Seitzei. This week's Parsha has many, many different mitzvos, narratives, etc. We're going to focus on something we've actually touched upon in the past, but from a different angle. This is Perek Chaf Gimel, Psukim Ches and Tes. That's 23 in Sefer Devarim, Deuteronomy 23, 8 and 9. The verse reads as follows: Lo tisa'ev Edomi, you shall not reject an Edomite. We'll talk about exactly how that rejection would manifest. Ki achichohu, because he is your brother. Lo tisa'ev Mitzri, don't reject an Egyptian. Ki ger ha'yisa ba'artzo, because you were a sojourner in his land. Bonim asher yivaldu lahem, children born to them. Dor shelishi, third generation, yavo lahem b'kal Hashem. They will enter the congregation of the Lord. What does this mean? So, first of all, we know Edom comes from Esav. Esav was Yaakov's brother. It says, Lo tisaiv Adomi ke'achicho. You shouldn't reject an Adomi, an Edomite, which is from Esav, because he is your brother. Achicha sometimes means a relative or a peer, even if not blood related, but the most common definition in context is that of a brother. And Esav was a brother to Yaakov. As a matter of fact, earlier in Parshas Balak, I believe, Chukas, the Moshe says, Ko amar achicha Yisrael. So says your brother to Israel, when he's entreating the Edomites and is asking them for permission to traverse their land and to pass by in peace. They didn't accept. As a matter of fact, they came to the border. They threatened to do battle with the children of Israel if they were to pass. That is not exactly a stellar record. And we know about the Mitzrim, who not only subjugated the Jews and oppressed them, but also killed many of their male-born children, threw them into the Nile. So this is pretty heavy stuff. And when you compare it to those who are not allowed to come into the congregation of the Lord, and that is Ammon and Moab. Ammon and Moab, who are also related, not quite as close as Esav, but they are born originally, Ammon and Moab were children born to Lot, who was Avram Avinu's nephew. So they're also related. So what did they do? So they tried to curse the children of Israel through the services of Bilam, and they also presented obstacles in terms of morality and licentiousness by allowing their daughters to mix freely and cohabit with the children of Israel, and that became a problem of its own. In fact, Rashi says, he observes that we see from this that somebody who causes another to sin has done more harm than somebody who tries to hurt another person physically. But let's look at the rationale that the verses give. First of all, what are the circumstances in which one could reject? What does it mean to reject? You can't join my club. I can't drive carpool with you. You can't come on the bus. You can't convert. That's not what it means. In fact, an Edomite is welcome to convert. An Egyptian is welcome to convert. There is a restriction, though, and the restriction, because of the history of the not treating the children of Israel well, there needs to be something of a generational cooling off period. That is, that if a member of one of these two nations, either an Edomite or Egyptian, and now we're talking about in the days of the Torah, and somewhat afterwards until Nebuchadnezzar. They said Nebuchadnezzar, according to the Gemara, jumbled all of the nations. So there today, practically speaking, there's no one that we can point to as an Edomite, as an Ammonite, as a Moabite, as an Egyptian. Even those Egyptians who live in Egypt, there may be some who say that they are direct descendants, but it's a jumble, it's a mishmash. And as a practical matter, these restrictions don't apply, but they do inform us. So if someone converts from either Edom or Mitzrayim, so they have to marry somebody. If they're going to marry, their marriage is restricted to somebody similarly situated, and the next generation, likewise, third generation, the restrictions are off. What's going on? Well, there needs to be some kind of dilution because of the offense of the previous generations. Why is this permissible? Let's talk about the rationale that the Torah gives. In other words, why is it permissible for them to join at all? Why don't we just say they're canceled and they can't join, they can't convert, they can't marry? That's not the way of the Torah. And that's something I'd like to focus on here. How do we deal with people who have done us wrong? Well, first of all, it depends on the type of wrong that they do. If it's one who attempts to cause us to sin actively, who is actively attempting to harm us, we have to distance ourselves. How about if they, in the past, they harmed us, not just attempted, but if they did harm us or they attempted to harm us? Well, then we look for other factors. What are some of the factors? Number one, family. Family. Ki achichohu. Don't reject Esav. Don't reject Edom. Ki achichohu. They are family. What does that mean? That means even if family does wrong to someone else, you do what you can to bridge the gap. What the Torah is saying is don't perpetuate that fight. And how about the Mitzri, who was very cruel to us? Similarly, there is an exculpation. There's an exculpatory factor here. What is it? Ger ha'yisa b'artzo. You were a sojourner. They took you in when you were at risk of dying of malnourishment, and when there was a famine. They took you in. That's another mitigating factor. In other words, somebody who does something kind to another person, even if mixed in with that kindness or subsequent kindness, there's some element of offense or even cruelty, as there was with the Mitzrayim, with the Egyptians. Nevertheless, they're not canceled. They're not complete. There's a certain distancing that takes place, but they're not canceled. Why? Because of hakaras hatov. Because we owe a duty of gratitude, a debt of gratitude to people who help us out, and we can't simply shut them out of our lives. So the guiding principle here is family and gratitude for somebody having helped us out. One could read into these verses a secondary meaning that reflects that the motivation frequently for rejection. And you have to change it up a little bit. And I'm not claiming that this is the principal understanding, the most obvious understanding of the verse, but it's one that is, I believe, is embedded here, which is, instead of saying, lo tisa'ev ki achichahu, don't reject, and the reason for not rejecting is ki achichahu, you could read it, lo tisa'ev ki adomi ki achichahu, don't reject him because he's family. Lo tisa'ev mitzri ki ger ha'yisav artzo, don't reject a mitzri because he did you a favor. Well, the first one I kind of understand. You only hurt the ones you love. Most people, I would guess, who are not on talking terms with other people, the people who they're not on talking terms with tend to be people who they're related to, sometimes very closely. Lo tisa'ev adomi ki achichu. Don't reject him because he's family. On the contrary, embrace him because he's family. Find a way to bridge the gap. Find a way to put the machlokas, the dispute, aside, and certainly don't let it infect future generations. If you have beef with somebody, don't impose that on your kids. Don't impose it on your grandchildren. Don't impose it on your friends. You work it out. How about somebody who does you a favor? I have a recollection from my childhood of walking to shul, to the synagogue with my father, who was the rabbi of the shul. And we're walking, and there was somebody who most obviously crossed the street as my father was walking, and then as we passed, he crossed back and went on his way. It was very strange. My father was a beloved rabbi in the city of Detroit. I still hear from people who say, oh, your father, we loved your father. My parents, my grandparents, your father performed their wedding ceremony, etc. So I asked my father, what's going on? Why was there this obvious response? And my father said, Nebuch, he said, this person had a very hard time finding a job and that would allow him to keep Shabbos. My father found him a job that allowed him to keep Shabbos. And when he would see my father, he would be reminded of his own shortcomings. This obviously is a little bit of armchair psychology. But he would be reminded of his own shortcomings and how he needed the help of another person, and it made him very uncomfortable. And he just didn't want to face my father. Tragic, not for my father, but tragic for an individual who was the recipient of a kindness to not be able to draw upon the wellspring of hakar satov, of gratitude, and to share that. It takes a little bit of gevura, it takes a little bit of courage to say thank you to somebody who helped you when you were in a bad way. Okay, draw on that, and certainly don't use that, and don't use the fact that somebody's a family member to reject. On the contrary, use those factors to bring people closer, to exercise ahavas Yisrael, ahavas habrios, love of another Jew, love of another human being. Because ultimately, when we get together, as long as we don't harm each other, when we get together, we're better than when we're apart. Have a good Shabbos.